AskReddit a question. Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Submitted by DWL52. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson, Arizona up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the lights off. Anyway, around 4 AM I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point I'm wide the fuck awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight truck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Submitted by Aaron Rogers Bowl. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains/Minnesota area. One night around 2 AM I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat. Like, really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the 2 people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Submitted by Joe Bowtown. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the 3rd night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan, and showed him his ID. Somehow that guy got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck, and was on his way. Submitted by 3 Colas. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate 4 miles and saw not one set of headlights. Submitted by the _user_ of driving through rural NM, Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car. Sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around a corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 feet tall flames. Hundreds of yards in all directions, while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. Was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly thought I may have hallucinated it. Checked the news. A propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Submitted by maimed _ A story a trucker told me happened this summer. He picked up his load in McAllen, Texas. It borders with Mexico and was stopped by the police on his way to the north. Maybe a roadside inspection or at scale. I don't remember why he was stopped. Anyway, the police, W/K9, started questioning him if he was alone in the truck, what is he hauling, etc. He said he was alone, but the police made him go through the X-ray machine and found he in fact wasn't alone. They found someone hiding inside the wind deflector and took them both to the police station for questioning. The driver recalled the stop at the gas station, truck stop, in the McAllen area, and went inside the store to buy something. Looks like his passenger go up there when he wasn't around. The driver explained he has no idea who this person is. This man also was honest and said they don't know each other and hid there to get away from the border town. Anyway, after long questioning, the driver was let go and his passenger was apparently arrested for illegally crossing the border. Submitted by Screw Lucy. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a "mistrunchable bun," as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks back "F***CK this and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing/misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lobby and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman/car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Submitted by Pen Bandit. Around 2006ish I was driving flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the manuscript, AL-TN state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. Found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decide to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him cause I'm in the middle of nowhere and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I'm to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long tapered to a blunt point on one end and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains etc. The guy gets to me and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as FCK. Like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said FCK'd good enough to party. The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off. Like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, cause I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says I've got a long walk. I'm like yeah man, you do, we are in the middle of nowhere. Making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. I've got a long walk. At this point I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that. Apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him, and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck, and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving, like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his hand and now I'm nervous. Cause he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this dead ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Submitted by Spaghetti I saw some. Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss if you sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store / bait shop with a sign reading "Eat here, get worms." Submitted by Akano 10. Parked off an exit ramp at about 3 AM for my 10 hour. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. A little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. Started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out the corner of my vision eye though I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look, saw the figure but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot, maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. Highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure, and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out, the field was empty, the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped, I pinched off, and jumped back in. I took off down the highway, didn't give one shit about a violation. Stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full Loves. Haven't stopped on a ramp since. Submitted by I Collect the Dead. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these mats of dirt areas every 40 miles, where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night, and closed my blinds, and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain, but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains, but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors, or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding, before I hear another truck approach, and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Submitted by Skill Gannon. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night going through a slow stretch at about 30 kilometers an hour. Every so often I think I see something out the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I knock though I don't catch it. Finally on about the third time I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Submitted by MDP 928. Years ago I read an answer on a thread with this question, about a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse, and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. Submitted by Mr. Ed 57076. I've seen some rather screwed up stuff over the years. From bad wrecks, drug addicts, panhandlers and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 at the intersection of ND 30 near Sikeston. I came out of the building after using the facilities and got ready to leave. As I was starting to pull out, a guy opened his car door. The angle was just right to see that he was buck naked. Then he gets out of his car and starts walking around his car. I'm not sure if he was a druggie or just thought this is a good way to pick up a truck driver I've never met before. I just drove away and didn't look back. Maybe that isn't creepy in the sense that op meant it, but I thought it was. One story that was creepy to me was that I was driving across Kansas on I-70 headed west. There is a pretty long stretch out there that's just a couple little towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I realized I had been passed several times by this beat up old motorhome. Several people sat with their noses almost pressed to the window, watching me with creepy interest as I passed. Every time. And I never noticed where I repassed them at. A couple times I swear they passed me twice where there was no rest areas or exits to pull off at. I would have seen them stopped somewhere, but yet, here they were passing me again. They all looked like some variant of Charles Manson or some other freaky type. Had me pretty uptight by the time I got to the tar truck stop in Lemon and stopped for the night. And almost every driver I know has seen stuff late at night that just can't be explained. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe not. But I've seen very large man-like shadows cross the road way too fast for their size several times. I ain't saying it's a Bigfoot. Never got a clear view. Was always out at the end of the headlights where I couldn't be entirely sure I even seen anything. But it sure looked like a large something crossing a whole road in just a couple of steps. Really weird. Submitted by Dr. Cowart. My great uncle drove big trucks. Living in the middle of nowhere, sometimes people would leave trash on the road. And since he had a big truck, he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident, looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten-age little kid that just heads back to their house as nothing happened. Submitted by Wider Than Longer. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 AM. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head. Not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, pig head lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed on till he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. Submitted by Ton Inc. My father was a truck driver, and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired, wasn't low on sleep or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night.